What's up, world? I just wanted to do a live stream here off the top without too much preparation, in part because I wanted to try out this new platform and software in preparation for some things to come, but also to go over a couple of things that came up during a conversation I had earlier today with the good people at By Any Means Necessary, Sister Jackie Lukman and Sean Blackman, about Biden and his new appointments. So I thought, just to try this out, I would do that. So obviously, depending on where you all are watching this, please share it, like it, comment on it, critique it, subscribe, whatever all that good stuff is. And check out mixwhatilike.org for stuff that's coming up later on, including on Friday. I'm excited for this. A sort of a combo thing with Africans Arise, the brother who runs that, and we're gonna have a Pan-African global conversation about Steve McQueen's new Amazon product, Small Axe Mangrove. So check us out on Friday. Okay, so let's get into this a little bit. Obviously, feel free to comment, as some already have, or anything or whatever. Let me know what you think. This is essentially what happened in the last couple of days that I know a lot of people have noticed. Yeah, we will have Daruba on again. No question. We're in constant contact with Daruba, and we'll have him on again as soon as possible. Please check out mixwhatilike.org. We have a really good catalog of a lot of stuff, but of stuff with Daruba. So definitely feel free to check that out. But we'll definitely look to get him back on again today. Thank you very much, Baker Ocean. Appreciate that. And thanks for listening to By Any Means Necessary. They do a lot of good work. And, anyway. So some of what we talked about today on that program, I'll just go over here a little bit and see what you all think. But essentially, it starts with, of course, in this case, the nomination of Antony Blinken, who you see here, who has a long history of working with Biden, Obama, and he is now going to be advising on, as Secretary of State, rather, advising on foreign policy. But it's very interesting what he's doing. So, and the other person that we're going to look at very quickly in this discussion is his other appointment, Linda Thomas-Greenfield. But I want to start with Blinken because I listened to this podcast here earlier today, which I would encourage, because it's important that we don't just listen to media that affirms our point of view. We should be comfortable looking at things we don't agree with. And to that end, a lot of things, what I used to do much more often than I do now is read not only Washington Post, New York Times, but the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, Forbes magazine, sometimes Fox News, Fox broadcasts, so that I can somewhat get an idea of what is being said. And with this thing that Blinken did, I checked it out earlier today, this podcast here called Intelligence Matters. And I would highly encourage, if anybody's interested in learning more about this new appointment, this is a good place to start. And in a few minutes, I will go back through some of the chats I see coming up and see if I can respond to some of them, some interesting points being made for sure. But just very quickly, so this guy, he goes on this podcast, and the podcast is run by, as you see here, Mike Morrell, the former deputy director of the CIA. Somewhere in here it says that the former director. I'm sorry, right here, the former acting director of the CIA. Sorry, right here, Intelligence Matter, Mike Morrell, former acting director of the CIA, And at the time that he did this interview earlier this year, not too long ago, I don't know what the date is, but not too long ago, before this election, obviously, he interviewed who at the time was the former Deputy Secretary of State and Deputy National Security Advisor to Barack Obama, Antony Blinken. Blinken also has a history going back to Bill Clinton as well. But what he says in this thing is really fascinating. First of all, what he does is he starts off in the podcast by talking about his own background. And he starts laying out a very important myth that is about American exceptionalism and Western, Western exceptionalism and Western, the value of Western civilization by talking about his own Jewish heritage. And he talks about how having family members. So when he's starting to talk about his worldview, he's talking about his family members surviving pogroms, surviving the Nazi Holocaust, and surviving the Holocaust and pogroms, and creating for him, and even surviving being saved by Black American GIs. So he had the whole story of American exceptionalism folded in, having his ancestors saved by American GIs, being the first out of the tank to save one of his ancestors from one of the death camps. And the reason he starts this, and this is something that is commonplace in regardless of background, but any group coming from the nominal outside, especially when speaking to a Gentile insider from the CIA on his podcast, wants to make it clear that though he is coming as an outsider, and Jews, yes, are still considered outsiders from Western civilization, he is explaining that he is not a threat, that he is not what no disrespect to the great activist Ward Churchill, Winston Churchill called the internationalist Jew, the fear of the internationalist Jew, who inspired a support for the Zionist project because of fears that Jews would be too radical, were fomenting communism, were wanting to spread support for labor unions. So as a way to get rid of them from European countries, there was a desire spoken of by, I keep wanting to say Ward, Winston Churchill, in the post-Second World War desire to help get rid of the problematic Jew by also expanding European Western dominance in the so-called Middle East. And I want to point to a very important article that I always go back to when I talk about this, because it's the best, of all that I've read or tried to learn about Zionism over the years. It is the best, most succinct and politically appropriate article on the history of Zionism. So I just wanted to just quickly pull it up here and show it. It's written by Annie Levin, or Annie Zirin. She apparently doesn't. Well, anyway, let me just leave it to her. Let me pull this up differently so you can hopefully see it here. I'll try to make it a little bit bigger because there's a portion of this I want to make sure. And it's talking about here in the roots of Zionism, what I'm talking about, just this one point that, actually, that's not the part I wanted here. Let me just find internationalists. There we go. Right here, the British ruling class. The British ruling class, which was rabidly anti-Semitic, had its own reasons for this support, that is support for the Zionist project or the establishment of Israel. Out of the First World War, Arab nationalism had emerged as a major threat to domination in the Middle East, and Britain hoped that Zionists could be a useful force for policing the Arabs. But Winston Churchill gave another reason for supporting Zionism: the defeat of the left-wing international Jews. In an astoundingly anti-Semitic article titled "Zionism versus Bolshevism," Churchill wrote. And essentially what he's saying here is he would prefer Zionism to Bolshevism because Bolshevism was the Bolsheviks, the labor, activist, socialist, communist overthrow, movement of overthrow that so many capitalists feared. So his thing here was, first, there are Jews dwelling in every country throughout the world, identify themselves with that country, enter into its national life, and while adhering faithfully to their own religion, regard themselves as citizens in the fullest sense of the state which has received them. So again, he's talking about that old thing of Jews being in a country, but not really being part of that country, but taking advantage of what that country offers them. In violent opposition to all sphere of Jewish effort rise the schemes of the international Jews. This movement among the Jews is not new. From the days of Spartacus to those of Karl Marx and down to Trotsky, Bela Kun, Rosa Luxemburg, and Emma Goldman, the worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization and for reconstitution of society on the basis of arrested development and envious malevolence and impossible equality has been steadily growing. So in other words, what he's saying is that the problem is that this international Jew wants to foment radical redistribution of wealth, wants to support the laborers and so on, and this is something that is antithetical to them. So while wanting to control Arabs and control that region for their own purposes, they wanted to support a Zionist project, which is as conservative, capitalist, imperialist, and often identified by more and more these days as apartheid and colonial. So, but anyway, my point is that this is what Blinken is trying to convince his CIA podcast host is not the threat that he represents. So by going through and talking about how his own people suffered historically in pogroms and by Nazis, he is setting the left edge by letting everybody know I come from oppression. So when I talk about what needs to be done in response to oppression and inequality, nobody will go to my left, because I am saying I have suffered as much as anyone, and I am concluding as I am concluding. And I am encouraging, as he says in this podcast, just to move it along a little bit, that he wants to be part of a process that expands American dominance in the world beyond what has taken place since World War II. Because as he points out in this podcast, when the US is not taking control of the world, it descends into chaos. So it sets up this false dichotomy that either the US is in charge or the world descends into chaos or is taken over by the Chinese, which is the equivalent of descending into chaos. So it's a very slick and nuanced presentation that he's offering, that if you aren't familiar with the history of Jews and particularly Zionism, or not paying attention closely to the laying out of the mythology, it can become pernicious. It can have a pernicious effect. Now, I don't want to be misunderstood here. This is not, I don't want to be lumped into this, the groups of anti-Jews and conspiracy theories and all this kind of stuff. What I'm simply saying is I'm paying attention to the mythology he is laying out, which is something that is essential and important, as it sets the context for what he would say later in that podcast. Again, a podcast, by the way, sponsored by Raytheon, one of the major military industrial complex players on a CIA platform that is proudly espousing the globalist, as they were saying, need for U.S. dominance in the world. All right, so that's anyway, one part. But as he says also, that this is the third part I left out that he talked about, and forgive me for this. I even have the note right in front of me. He talked about his Jewish ancestors surviving pogroms, Nazis, and then the communism of Russia. That's the key part. I don't know. I just should have started off with, because it's right at the top of my notes, and that's what is really the point of transition I'm trying to get to. So what he's saying by laying out this myth is, as a Jew, he and his people have suffered mightily. He knows the ravages that are potentially existent in the world, and he knows that without the United States and a strong Western allied civilization partnership, that the world would descend into chaos or be taken over by communists, this time in the form of the Chinese. And so he lays out from the very beginning, he is a friendly outsider. He is decidedly wedded to the project of American exceptionalism and expansion of U.S. global dominance, and that communism is to be likened and compared to pogroms and Nazis. So it sets up this perfect logic that the Democratic Party is writ large using right now to justify why they barely beat Trump, by saying that there was too much attention paid to the so-called identity politics, Black Lives Matter, to the conditions of women, to the conditions of the poor. And if they just move away from police violence and defunding the police and all this radical socialist nonsense, they would have done better. When obviously the numbers are all pretty clear, they would have done even better. They would have won in a landslide had they actually adopted some of those politics and policies around addressing them. But the narrative here is America's good, Nazis, pogroms, and ultimately communism are all the same and they're all bad. And the little story about Black GIs being among the first to liberate the death camps, which is in one sense true, also belies the reality that it was really Russia that won the war against the Nazis. It was Russia that was in the fight first. It was Russia that did the most fighting, took on the most losses, and did the most damage to the Nazis. And had it not been for Russia, who knows? And given that the United States had a friendly business relationship with Hitler and Mussolini, who knows? But the point is, so sometimes I joke, even with my own Jewish relatives, thank goodness that Japan did what it did, because if there had been no response, as it was with the Japanese, to the war, the active war of aggression by blockading and so on and so forth, that had already taken place by the United States, and had there been no invasion of Pearl Harbor, the United States may have never entered the war and may have never helped turn the tide, and it may have taken Russia even longer to defeat the Nazis. So, but anyway, he lays that out. It's very an important point. Then, as we're going to air with By Any Means Necessary earlier today, and hopefully I'll put it up at imixwhatilike.org and link to their webpage also. I got from the great journalist Sam Husseini and Institute for Public Accuracy, and I think I was calling it something else on the air, but it's the Institute for Public Accuracy. And they put out these news alerts and updates, and one of them came from you know what, I'll just let me just, I think I could just put the whole thing right here in a banner, right? And then you could just more easily see it. No, you can't. All right. So what I will pull up here just very quickly is at least part of what I wanted to show. That first, this quote here, let's see, is from Zarifa Baroud, who is with American Muslims for Palestine. And she recently wrote a piece called The Leahy Laws, Why Biden's Promise to Israel is Illegal. And she's talking about this. This is in the context of the appointment of Blinken and his relationship not only to previous Democratic Party administrations, but his trajectory in terms of the United States relationship to Israel. And she says here that the Leahy laws are essentially that foreign military assistance must be suspended or discontinued if there exists credible information that the recipient foreign security force unit has committed a gross human rights violation. And then this is the part I put here, where Blinken, then Joe Biden's senior advisor, said, quote, he, meaning Biden, would not tie military assistance to Israel to any political decisions that it makes. Period. Full stop, he said. He's committed to it. That is, Biden would not tie military assistance to Israel to any political decisions that it makes, meaning that that decision would break the Leahy law, which says that foreign military assistance must be suspended or discontinued if there exists credible information that the recipient foreign security force unit has committed a gross human rights violation. In other words, if you're concerned about Palestinian rights and the human rights of people in the so-called Middle East, if you ever thought that Biden and the Democrats were going to push Israel to a more progressive position, Biden is here saying, or his advisor that he just appointed, Blinken, is saying Biden, for whom he has worked for a long time, has made it clear that he would not tie military assistance to Israel to any political decisions that it makes. Period. Full stop. He said it. He's committed to it. End quote. So if Palestinians are proven once again to have suffered human rights violations by Israel, the United States is definitely not going to suspend any of our tax dollar support. The other piece that they include in this is from Richard Silverstein, who writes at Tikkun Olam, just wrote a piece, Biden names Blinken Secretary of State, Israel lobby is pleased, or Israel lobby pleased, end quote, which notes during the campaign, Blinken's most, and this is the part I would want you to, let me go ahead and put this here so you can read it along with me, this part at least. During the campaign, Blinken's most notable comments were made in a conference called the Pro-Israel Leaders, hosted by the Democratic Majority for Israel. DMI is a hawkish group, which is the Democratic Party version of AIPAC. Though the latter claims it is bipartisan, it is common knowledge that the vast majority of its membership, donors, and leaders are Republican. Thus, DMI was manufactured to ensure that Democrats would not stay. In other words, AIPAC is known to be a Republican entity. So the Democratic Majority for Israel, or DMI, was manufactured, quote, to ensure that Democrats would not stray too far from the pro-Israel party line. The group has regularly acted as an enforcer within the party when candidates espouse positions considered anti-Israel, end quote. Or to quote further, one more, among those who've been taken to the woodshed are Bernie Sanders, Ilhan Omar, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The group sunk over $1 million in ads in the Iowa primary attacking Bernie Sanders. The ads didn't mention Sanders' views on Israel, end quote. So my point in all of this, again, I just wanted to share some of this to again make the point writ large that we need different politics. This is just yet another example of how the Democratic Party does not allow for an inclusion of actual progressives, does not allow for inclusion of actual change agent politics, and does a lot of the playing to our various identities and ethnic groups and genders and sexual identities, etc., to placate what are really material needs that need to be addressed by public policy and redistribution of the wealth we all help to create. So in this case, Blinken has accepted the American view narrative that the horrors suffered by Jews at the hands of Europeans, by the way, can only be solved by and strengthened if the world addresses itself to American and Western civilization worldviews, politics, ideologies, and economic systems, markets, etc. Which leads me to the second half of this, just very quickly, because the other piece that we spoke about on BAM was the appointment of Linda Thomas-Greenfield, who, as you'll see here, if you didn't know already, and many of us did not know her, so we had to look her up, to be quite honest, is a Black woman. And I don't pretend to be an expert on her, and I haven't heard any of her podcasts yet, but just looking at some of what she has done here, she is, at the time of this WikiLeaks entry, an American diplomat who served the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs in the United States Department of State's Bureau of African Affairs from 2013 to 2017. And she is a senior counselor at Albright Stonebridge Group in Washington, D.C. So two things are immediately clear, or should be immediately clear. One, she's been around long enough to have overseen, participated in, said nothing bad about, supported, aided AFRICOM, or the Africa Command, or the militarization of all of continental Africa's militaries under the control of the West and housed up there in, I believe, Berlin. Something instituted just after Obama got elected, and something that he presided over, and clearly so did she. So this doesn't sound like a positive to me. But more specifically, as I looked into this group that she works with, another very interesting element comes out, very similar again to the point about Blinken, that this tendency to want to replace actual policy with overtures to people's identities is something we have to really evolve beyond. So if we just look here, I just went to this website, the Albright Stonebridge Group, and it's a financial investment firm that helps well, this I think says a lot, if not at all. The international government affairs and advocacy policy with a record of success in more than 120 countries and long-term relationships with decision makers around the world, ASG helps preserve and strengthen our clients' ability to operate and grow. We translate government priorities into client opportunities and client goals in terms governments and other stakeholders can understand. And involved in government affairs, commercial negotiations, dispute resolution, issue advocacy, regulatory proceedings, partner development, and the big one down here for me, at least, as a communication scholar, is public affairs and strategic communications, which is just code word euphemism for propaganda, psychological warfare, what the Germans called ideological warfare, worldview warfare. This is what that is, to help bridge government policy through long-term relationships with decision makers around the world to strengthen our clients' ability to operate and grow. Well, how do businesses operate and grow? How do corporations operate and grow? How do private equity groups operate and grow? Well, they they help set policy through influence. They sometimes write legislation. They sometimes withdraw investment to suppress the currency in a given country. Anything to help shape the public policy of that country to be suitable to the business growth of their clients. So this is just the latest, some of the latest folks that Biden has brought in, which I, again, am arguing is just one more reminder that we have to be moving differently in the way we organize and engage electoral politics, if in fact that is going to be the primary locus of struggle. All right, so that was it. Like I said, I just wanted to do a relatively short one of these impromptu, just running off some notes I had from the great By Any Means Necessary show, which you should all support and listen to every day with Jackie Luqman and Sean Blackman. Obviously, you should be watching Breakthrough News. You should be checking out Renegade Culture Podcast. You should be watching African Esquire. There's a lot of stuff that's out there that's doing some good work. And then there's even some white ones that I think are really important too. The Jimmy Dore Show, I think people should be watching more and more often. It's hilarious. And I think he's taken a stance on politics that many of us should be taking that we don't hear in many Black media. Pushback with Aaron Mate, the whole Gray Zone crew, Anya Parampil, I think I'm mispronouncing her name, Anya, but she does great work. It's all dope and very informative and stuff you don't get elsewhere. They don't talk about Blackness a lot. They don't talk about political prisoners, which is something that I'll obviously continue to do. And they don't talk a lot about the radical side of Black radical traditions. But that's, they can't do everything. So anyway, let me just go through some of these before we wrap up. I'm happy to stick around a little bit and let's see. When are you going on the Hill Rising? Oh, I don't expect that's ever going to happen. They are crystal ball, no relation. I like the show. I watch it every day. Actually, I do. Yeah, I watch it every day. But I like what they're doing with the Democrat Republican populism, and Crystal refers to herself as at least having socialist tendencies every once in a while, which I think is pretty cool. But when it comes to race, they seem to only want to talk to Zed Jelani, who seems to have a very conservative take on the issue. And Segar and Jetty has a very conservative take on it. They don't like critical race theory. They don't. So they've only had Gerald Horne on, I think, once, and they didn't like that too much. So if he can't get on and get some run, I don't see how I would be invited on. And then they have the brother they call the funky academic, who is I guess enough for them. But I've noticed that in terms of Black folks, they don't have Black folks on unless they're regular Democratic or Republican Party strategists. So they don't have Black people on to talk about race, and they don't have Black people on to talk about, or anybody on to talk about real left politics. So I don't expect that I'd be on there. Appreciate you, the district. Yeah, the small acts thing. But for those watching here, do check us out if you can live Friday morning at 10:30. Going to be with brothers from African Arise, and maybe some other special guests if we can arrange it to talk about the new Steve McQueen Amazon product, Small Acts, Mangrove, which I think is at minimum a very important piece and worthy of some viewing and some discussion. Man, peace to you, King. Thank you for checking us out. Yeah, another imperialist tool, RIP Iran. Yeah, that might be the case, man. Iran might need to, No, you can't push Biden to the left because the party itself won't go to the left. Same thing. Look, I don't watch Democracy Now! As much as I used to, so I can't comment because a lot of I've just argued over the years. She's gone. The show's gone more to the middle, and I think a lot of it has to do with trying to capture more grant money and more mainstream support and financial support. They have a big fancy studio in the middle of New York City. They have a lot of people they try to fund and to support. So they're not going to be able to sustain themselves staying so far to the left. So you don't hear slogans like, breaking the corporate sound barrier on there anymore. You don't hear them talk about radical Pan-Africanists like the show did in its very early infancy when, what was his name? Brother Salim Mulakil was still there. I think that was him. So there's a lot of, and NPR is, radio alger, as Fanon said. We can't expect too much there either. Although I was briefly on NPR for 5 minutes earlier this year talking about my buying power book, but like I said, it was actually wasn't even 5 minutes. I was in a 5-minute segment for about 20, 30 seconds. Yeah, I'm agreeing with you on that. Samantha Powers and Blinken is going to be great. It's going to be great for the job since he's new first-time dad. Okay. Yeah, peace to you too. Shaka Ra. Susan, I guess Susan Benghazi Rice was too toxic to be confirmed. I mean, I don't know. That's a good point. I mean, I don't know. Or maybe she'll get some other role in the administration. Be pushed. Yeah, you can't push them to the left. That's not realistic at all. Yeah, no, look, yeah, most, Zionism is not a topic that's easily discussed. It's not a welcomed conversation in many places, and easily, as we see, big time examples, Jeremy Corbyn in England being blamed for, I don't think he was even talking about Zionism, but anything to the left is seen as quote unquote anti-Semitic. I'll admit that some of it I might, and I'll share some of this here. I could use some of this as maybe some protection. Maybe this gives me protection. I don't know. Or maybe this gets me, as has been the case before, described as a self-hating Jew. But, when Blinken is describing the myths of his own Jewish heritage, the myths I was raised on with my Jewish mother and Black father were very different. And not even to get into the details about whether they're true or not, but the mythology I was raised on were that Jews were not white. Jews were to be part of the anti-colonial struggle. Jews were to the quote unquote chosenness was mythologized in my household as Jews were selected to be part and partial of anti-colonial radical movements involving Black and other people. So this idea that the mythology that Blinken is working with would lead him going into another direction is, again, something that is I'm recognizing as the creation of a myth, and one that is beneficial to those who magnify or project that myth. So and my grandmother, my mother's mother, born in what was then Palestine, and then her father and them taken out of or forced out of that community because they were anti-religious and friendly with the Arabs. The mythology, again, that I grew up with was that Zionism was repressive, that it was a trick to get Jews out of the diaspora and into that region of the world to perform some function for that political project. Now, again, people don't have to agree with this, and I understand and recognize, as Blinken is a representative of, that there are other competing views of this. But that's the mythology I was raised with, that I grew up with. Those were the stories of that history that I was told and encouraged to. Jews were supposed to be the international threat that Churchill said. In other words, that Jews were supposed to be part of labor movements, were supposed to be part of socialist movements, were supposed to be supporting Black radical struggle here and around the world. We're supposed to be support. So in other words, it's just a different mythology. So I admit, maybe that gives me some room or some license, some freedom to talk about it that others might not have, and will, so be it. Although some of what has been said to me privately, and maybe some would argue about the trajectory of my career, might suggest something else. But the truth, it is what it is. And as someone who has tried to study it, I've come up indirectly. I didn't know him, but indirectly trying to emulate the political practice of Kwame Ture and the study habits of Kwame Ture. The conclusions are hard to deny, and it's just a matter of politics and ideology and which myth you prefer in terms of who you want to support or what side you come down on. Middle class. The first lighter have suffered as much as anyone else. Well, again, again, that's obviously debatable, but if you are, I understand that. So this is not to suggest or get into the comparisons, the oppression Olympics types things, and this is to not suggest any. But what I would say is that if you, again, the point I'm really just trying to get focused on, if the myth you are operating under is that, as Blinken is, that Jews suffered at the hands of other Europeans, though he's not saying that. I think it's always important to point that out. None of what these Jews suffered were at the hands of any other group. But at the hands of Europeans, what these Jews suffered, to them, obviously, could not be considered to be anything other than horrific. So it's not to be expected that a Jew suffering a pogrom or the Nazis would in that moment stop and say, this is not as bad as something else, or this is not as bad as some other process I may have even been complicit in. But what it is to say is that it allows for room for myth making to be developed, in this case, to suggest that pogroms and Nazis are the equivalent of communism, and that the answer to this is American and Western exceptionalism and civilization, and the only alternative to which is chaos. And that's something very entirely different. A lot of lies of assumption. I agree, very slick. It takes some intelligence. It does take intelligence. It also takes critical media literacy. It takes political education, and it takes collective, organized effort to keep up with any of this. To the extent that I have, it's been based on my connection to other groups, other organizations, and in this case, other individuals' work. Antony Blinken, that's who we're talking about here. I appreciate that. Stay balanced. I appreciate it. I'm admittedly new to this, but I do enjoy it. I think this is dope, and I miss the live radio we used to do and all of that. So I'm trying to get some of my crew to come into this space with me as well. Neoliberalism could fall for all I care. I agree. It's not very helpful. Dems are going to do business as usual. Yes, they are. And pay attention. Remember, during the campaign, Biden said, we're not changing anything. Nothing's going to change. He said that to Wall Street. He said that to the environmentalists because he said we're going to keep fracking. That's my godfather right there. I'm just gonna leave that comment up. That comes from the OGest of OGs. So I appreciate that, and I'm sure if I get anything wrong, he will either let me know immediately here or soon after. So yes, sir. And Mr. Porter, whenever you're ready, we want to invite you into this space as well, because there's nothing greater in analysis or more fire than that. Anyway, so it looks like I made it to the end of these comments. I really appreciate it. Again, there was no plan here other than the little outline of notes I had, and wanted to magnify some of the thoughts that I had earlier. And again, try out this platform a little bit. It is a lot of fun. I intend to keep doing it, and hopefully get some more of my crew over here as well, including Mr. Thomas Porter. Because please go to imixwhatilike.org, and here's homework if you haven't done it. Go to imixwhatilike.org and look for Tom Porter and check out our catalog of work with him, and then when we get him out here, you'll be more ready, and because it's amazing stuff. So, all right, good people, thanks again. Check out imixwhatilike.org for anything else, at imixwhatilike for all your relevant social media. Please do check us out on Friday morning with the Africans Arise crew, and a discussion of Small Axe Mangrove, some Pan-African Black Power, Black Panther Party in Britain. Good stuff there. So, all right, everybody, thanks again. I really do appreciate your time and you coming through. Peace if you're willing to fight for it, like Fred Hampton used to say, and we'll catch you in the whirlwind like Garvey. Peace, everybody.